first slide. We now have your first slide, Craig.
You do, okay. Hang on.
We now have your second slide. All right. I'm getting out of here.
All right, well, let's, okay. All right, well, I'll do it this way. It's not kind of giving me the notes. It's not working right, but we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me and see me.
Yes. Yes.
So what I don't know what's going on with Zoom and my computer and all, but anyway, it seemed to all be working earlier. But anyway, what I'd like to do, first of all, thank you for the introduction. I enjoyed, well, maybe I won't say I enjoyed, because I kind of enjoyed doing the judging for your competition. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily fun because it's always very difficult. It's always very difficult because many times the images are so close. It's almost kind of like, oh my goodness, do I flip a coin here or what? But no, there's some great work going on both in A and B categories, and I applaud you all for your efforts, and I did enjoy doing it. So that said, what I want to cover this evening is a little bit about seeing and composing in black and white, and post-processing in black and white. And I want to talk a little bit about why I started black and white, not why I started, but why I returned to. Black and white is where I started, probably not unlike maybe some of you years ago in the early 70s. I think John mentioned my background in the military. You know, I bought for like $50 an old Petrie 35 millimeter film camera back then, if anybody recognizes the name of Petrie anymore. But it was, and we had a hobby. I was stationed at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia. And they had a hobby shop, a photography hobby shop. So I bought this camera, used camera from another airman. And I started shooting film. And of course, that's all they had back then. And started processing in the photo lab. And as soon as I started doing that, and you get in the dark room, get exposed to the environment in a dark room, and project that print on paper and put that in a developer and begin to see the magic of that thing slowly appear. It's just kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm hooked. It was just magic. It was just magic. And even as later times I had a dark room in my home, just even the smell of the chemicals and all, the developer and the fixer and all that stuff, just had, not that it had a pleasant, it didn't have a bad smell, but it had an aroma or an odor that connected you with what you were doing. And that's one thing I actually miss about the old school black and white darkroom. So that's where I began my journey. And over time, and of course in the military, you know, I wasn't a full-time photographer. When I tell people when I go on what they call TDYs, temporary duty assignments, and with other military members, some of these folks, pilots or otherwise, if we're going on a military aircraft, they'd be throwing on their sets of golf clubs. And what I'd be throwing on, I was a horrible golfer, so I threw on my camera equipment. So my off time was out doing photography. So over the years, I think back in 2006, I think I converted to from film to digital. And, that started my progress, or my journey, I guess, in digital photography. And more recently, I became a little bored. No, I didn't, not a little bored. I became quite bored with color. And it just, this lack of longevity of appeal, I would say, it just kind of like, there was just so much of it out there. And I'm not talking about bad stuff. I'm talking about fantastic stuff. When you look at this, but after a while, I can almost, I know where this picture was taken, but I've never been there. Iceland was a good example. I would be great to go to Iceland, but I've seen so much Iceland work of late that I'd mark it off my bucket list. And that's, so I was doing workshops. I was doing a fair number of workshops, and I found that really in doing these workshops, I wasn't producing anything for myself. I was producing it for my clients. And you know what? And I understand that, but fortunate for me, I wasn't a professional photographer in the sense that I wasn't a professional photographer in the sense that I had to pay my bills with my photography. So based on that, and what I felt like the market was saturated with all this stuff, that there was something missing, and I almost gave up photography altogether. I said, you know what? It's just not doing anything for me. And that sense of timeliness was missing. And so I knew I had to make a decision. I had to either sell my camera gear, or, as I call it, return to the cradle. And this is somewhat of a stolen phrase from, not quite, but it's a takeoff on Eric Clapton's, and I love the blues. I've always loved the blues for some strange reason. I don't know why, but I did. And when Eric Clapton really turned back to his blues roots, he actually had a CD or a CD at the time, I think, that the title of it was kind of returning to the roots, or back to his roots, or something of that nature. And it was all about blues. And so I thought, well, you know what? That's kind of where I am. It's not about all this color stuff anymore. It's, returning to the cradle where I started. So that's why now I shoot primarily in black and white. And of course, like this master here that we see on the screen right now, there are no rules. There's only good photographs, right? There are no rules in photography. We talk about rules all the time in composition, but he's saying, and no such, essentially saying, hey, forget the rules. A good photograph's a good photograph, period. And Ansel, he influenced me in some technical ways early on. And one of his proteges, if you will, he was an assistant of Ansel for a number of years, is John Sexton. And John Sexton's still around. He's still, and I've got a couple of his books anyway. Great photographer, but he was different from Ansel. Ansel was, at least, although he didn't only do grand landscapes, but he's mostly known for like his grand vistas and his images of Yosemite and some in the Tetons and other famous images that he's had. John Sexton is a little bit more intimate landscape kind of stuff, quiet light. As a matter of fact, the title of one of his books, which I own, Listening to the Trees and Quiet Light. both fantastic books. Now, of course, they're out of print, and you can still get them. I've seen them on eBay or other sources, anywhere from collector's editions that would go somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, $250 to just someone's got an old book they're wanting to get rid of for, $35. But you can certainly get them, and I think he's got some beautiful, beautiful work. I love John Sexton. Now, also, there's some other photographers that affected me or influenced me, I should say, early on. Elliot Porter, early color photographer, and his intimate landscapes impacted me in a way, because at the time I was living in Ohio, and there are no grand vistas in Ohio. Okay, kind of like Missouri in a number of ways. You don't see skies, so it is more or less intimate landscape kind of photography. And so I liked his work. I've got a number of his books, and also David Munch was another large format photographer that I was influenced by, mostly from his use of wide angle, predominant foreground objects in his compositions. So I would say maybe there are others that have influenced me in one way or another as well, but those four, I would say, certainly had some impact on my style. Now, back in the day, this is what I shot. I had an old Zone 6 Studio 45 4x5 field camera and a Pentax 67 medium 4 or 6x7. This is actually a little bit newer model. And I learned how to meter. I learned essentially using this Pentax zone calibrated 1 degree spot meter. That's what I used back then. And that's how I learned exposure, really, because like the Pentax, neither the Pentax I had at the time nor the 4x5, they didn't have a light meter. You just had to learn how to manually meter a scene and expose for it. So that's how I learned exposure. Now today, today what I have gone back to is essentially the same thing. Whenever I decided to go back to film, I got a Chamonix. It's not a Zone 6. It's a Chamonix 4x5, and I do have a Pentax 67, much like you see in this picture, for my medium format. And yes, I'm using an old Pentax 1 degree spot meter, modified for the zone system, just like you see in the picture. Back years ago, it's probably 30 years ago, these were all taken on 4x5 film and printed on 4x5 film, and with the exception of the church and the cemetery, which was photographed in St. Peters, Missouri, but it was on 4x5 as well. And I went back, as a matter of fact, I went back there to this location of the church just fairly recently, thinking I might want to reshoot it, but unfortunately they put a lot of buildings and stuff up all around it, and it's just not the same anymore. It's just not, it doesn't work. Okay, so why black and white? Well, number one, it helps you see differently. Black and white is not reality. Color is reality. So it helps you see differently, or even you might even say it forces you to see differently. You look at things differently. And even when you go out looking at subject matter, you're looking for different kinds of subjects than you would necessarily as you're photographing in color. As a matter of fact, I had a couple come up to me in a location last year in Hocking Hills, I believe it was. And this is I don't know if they were married or just a couple or business partners, but they did tell me that they ran some workshops, and they had picture, they had noticed me at a different location, and they couldn't figure out what I was taking a picture of. It's kind of like, what the hell is he, what's he doing? So he asked me about that. I said, well, I'm shooting black and white, and I look at things entirely differently from a black and white mindset. So my subject matter may be entirely different than what you might do in color. And black and white eliminates the distractions such as color casts and some other issues or challenges that we have when we shoot in color. And color is an element of a photograph in itself, in a color image. You don't have that in black and white. So you have to rely on other aspects, which can be challenging, or it can be, and it can be at the same time, conversely, can even be a blessing, because you don't have to worry about the distractions of color. And it offers an alternate rendition of reality, and that's kind of related to how it helps you see differently. You're compelled by removing color to create a different way to tell your story. So what forces you, okay, what am I trying to convey here? I don't have color to help, so how am I going to do it? And it also helps, it gives you more latitude in creating emotion or mood to a particular scene. You can do that, of course, in color, but I think you've got more creative latitude in black and white than you do in color. And then, of course, it's timeless. It's timeless. And in the competition that I looked at, there's one black and white image. I think only one black and white image, if I recall. And it was of there was a ship in a harbor or somewhere in a city line, and it was, and the sky was kind of moody and all like that. And I looked at that print, and I thought it was that had a mood to it, and it had a timelessness to it. That I am convinced that image would not have worked in color. It only worked in black and white. And it was a good image. I thought it did well. So whoever had that, whoever had that, was that film?
Stewart, that was Stewart, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
That
Just
was
a curiosity.
Stewart. Yeah,
It was film.
I'll point that out to them later.
Okay. Okay. All right. Some important considerations when you're thinking about black and white is what's the contrast of the subject relative to the scene. Now, I took this image was taken in the Badlands of South Dakota, early morning light, and what struck me was this peak over here. You see my cursor?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see the cursor or not.
Now we can.
Okay. Pointer options. Now, how about this? That might work better. I like the way the light was hitting that, and I really wanted to make that the prominent where your eye would ultimately go to. But the light was such that it had some beautiful light, side light, because it was early morning, that gave some good texture on your foregrounds. And of course, I had to, in processing, make sure I had some detail in the shadows, and you see the side light and the shadows and the textures of this area and this mound over here. So contrast is really, really important in the black and white image. And you can push contrast and clarity and some of these things far greater in black and white than you can in color. You'd ruin a color image doing some of this stuff, but in black and white, it actually helps the image. Okay, well, I guess I better, that pointer thing. Okay. Other considerations, the range of luminosity. Luminosity is kind of like contrast, but luminosity is the range of luminosity. Contrast is kind of like looks at the range of luminosity. Luminosity is the brightness of the subject. So you can have a high contrast image, like this is an image taken in Hocking Hills, early morning light, backlight of these beech trees, I believe, and the fall that's falling down here. Now, so this is somewhat of a backlit, somewhat of a higher contrast image based on the luminosity, was the brightness of the tonal values. And now you can have a low contrast image, of course, where, for example, maybe a forest scene in the fog, where your luminosity range is not going to be that great, so your contrast is not going to be that great either. And sometimes you want to think about the sky and how would they look in black and white, the sky and clouds. This image was taken a number of years ago in on the way up to the Patriarch Forest or Patriarch Grove in the bristlecone ancient bristlecone forest. And there'd been like 4 or 5 days of clear blue skies, which was not great. But there was a front coming, and all of a sudden this day on my travels up the switchbacks, that this streak of clouds came through, and we had like a half moon or close to a half moon. And it's like these clouds with this bristlecone skeleton kind of frame the moon. And I knew because of and in part because of the altitude we were, a very clear blue sky, I knew that would render very dark in a black and white and could really stand out in a black and white image. Now, another important thing you want to look for in black and white and compositions is patterns, textures, shapes, lines. Those are all things you don't have color, right? And this image, Death Valley, and it's not a typical image you would see from that location in today's color photography. But what this image has is almost all of it's got texture. You can see all this texture in here and all these mounds. It's got shapes and triangles. Always look for shapes and stuff like that, triangles. It's got lines and S-curve. It goes up through this dry wash, so a diagonal line in itself. So that's kind of what I look at. I was with a friend and he was off taking the typical Zabransky Point image with the sky and the distant mountains and all like that. And it's great and all this kind of stuff. But I was looking for more of the intimate kind of stuff, such as this. Now, light and shadow is another important thing. You can't, one thing you always want to do, and looking at black and white, is kind of notice where is your light coming from? And if it's not and if there's not a distinct area of the light, maybe you need to create it. And what this image was, it was kind of as you can probably, a cloudy day, or most likely, this was taken on that coast during this particular time in the afternoon. You get a lot of fog, sea fog kind of stuff. And I needed to create something with this image. So I created light in the way it looked like it's coming from the upper right in here. And also, I looked at these footprints and I said, you know what? Daggum, some of those footprints was taken from inside a sea cave. And I says, some of those footprints might even be mine. I'm not sure. So at first I said, well, this is a ruined image. And I thought, no, I can use this to my advantage. Make it look like someone is walking from the cave out to the sea. And you got this light that comes in from the outside, highlighting the footprints. And I gave a little bit of detail inside the cave. I didn't want to give too much detail and texture because I didn't want to take away from what I felt like was the main subject, the pathway to the sea stack and the light in the sky. And then, of course, black and white more, it can be more abstract and really emphasize some graphic qualities of light and form. I took this image in my backyard, actually, a couple of winters ago. Obviously a cold day, but it's just an example of, you know what, you can go out in your backyard and still find some interesting things to take photographs of. So aids to visualize in black and white. This is important. Now, back in the film days, and what I'm having to do right now is we didn't have the digital process, so we had to use color filters to help increase the tonal contrast, tonal separation between different elements. So filters, as a general rule, would lighten its own color and darken its complementary colors. That's why you would see oftentimes photographers would use a red filter on their camera to darken a sky, for example. Now, this only applies obviously to film cameras, but because we can do a lot of this stuff now digitally, if you have a digital camera in post-processing. And this is an example of how the filters might work. There's your color image, the no filter. The yellow filter lightens all the yellow objects, yellow and orange objects, but it's got yellow in it. And slightly, very slightly darkens the blue bowl. But you go to a red and look how it darkens the blue bowl even further. And the green lightens foliage. And notice how it lightened the tones of the grapes and the peppers and all, and others maybe not so much. And then you go to a blue filter, which I don't use much, but a blue filter, look what it did to the bowl. It really lightened that. And some will use the blue filter for shadow scenes or foggy scenes that's got a lot of blue in it to lighten that up a bit. I don't use a blue so much myself. But useful filters today, I don't know what these objects are in my PowerPoint. That's kind of one of those anomalies that show up and you can't figure out how to get rid of it. But anyway, polarizer. Polarizer, of course, is useful anytime, color or black and white. And it's not so much for the sky, although in some cases you can use it for the sky. It might help, but mostly to get rid of reflections, either reflections in the water or off of wet rocks or shiny leaves, that kind of thing. The other is neutral density. Neutral density comes in a couple of types. One is your graduated to help balance out the dynamic range, for example, the sky in the foreground. Now, in the digital world, some people say that graduated filters are antiquated. They're no longer, because you can just, take 2 or 3 images and blend them, and that's true. And I would do that, but I'm a little bit old school. I still like to use a graduated filter when I can. And of course, shooting film, you can't do the bracketing. Well, technically, there's probably a way to do it, but it's easier, much easier to take advantage of a graduated neutral density filter of various strengths. The other, of course, is a solid neutral density, and that's to control or slow down your shutter speeds. And that's principally used for long exposure techniques. And then lastly, and most importantly, with respect to black and white photography, is a viewing filter. It's kind of a Ratten number 90 viewing filter. The one in the top is one that I had years ago with my Zone 6 camera. And the little opening there is a 4:5 aspect ratio. So you could use it both as a viewing, kind of a view filter with regard to kind of guesstimating a composition as opposed, and also as to viewing what the tonal values would look like in black and white. And what this does is it doesn't give you a black and white image looking through it, but it'll give you a brief presentation of tonal separation, which might give you a clue as to how well it might look in black and white. And it only works for, you can't hold it up to your eye too long because your brain adjusts to it and then it loses its effect. But it is a valuable aid. I use one today. I've got this one that I use. And also Tiffin still makes them. You can get them at B&H. Tiffin makes these. I think they're about $40 through B&H. And you can use them to help you kind of visualize tonal values and a potential composition.
Craig, is that
Now,
a,
seeing in black and white.
is that a red filter? Is that what?
Go ahead.
color is that? Okay. All right.
No, it's kind of an amber filter. It's not red. It's kind of an amber, brownish amber filter. Okay, seeing in black and white, we just talked about the black and white viewing filter. I think is a useful aid, but camera settings, and I'm talking about camera settings for digital photographers. I would recommend setting your. Let me give a little bit of a caveat here. My brain doesn't work well going out in the field and shooting both color and black and white. I can't do that. My mindset, my mental mindset has got to be I'm shooting black and white. So I set my camera to monochrome and use the live view in my digital camera. Now I do still shoot digital. I've got also, other than the cameras I talked about earlier, I've got a medium format Pentax 645Z, which it's a medium format digital camera. And I set my viewfinder to monochrome. And all your modern cameras have that. Your digital cameras have that. You go and set your, they call them different things depending on your camera manufacturer, but you can go in and your live view rather than selecting, color, landscape, or portrait, or whatever you kind of do. They also either have like what they'll either call monochrome or black and white, whatever term they use for it. You can set it to where your live view shows a black and white type of image. Now, why this is useful is it because it helps you learn to see in black and white. Now it's going to be, it's not going to be the image you would ultimately produce in post-processing, but it helps you see what works and what won't work in black and white. So it's a good aid. You use the combination of the viewing filter and the monochrome live view, it will really accelerate your ability to learn to see in black and white. And I tell people one of the reasons I don't turn on my live view or don't turn on the color in my live view, because I don't want to be seduced by the color. I want my mind to be totally engrossed in black and white. So shoot monochrome or convert later. This is related to just the previous comment. Is kind of like, yeah, you can shoot in color, and then just shoot like you always shoot, and then go after the fact and say, well, this might make a good black and white, and convert it. And I've done that, but really, if you really want to focus on black and white, I say, come over to the dark side. Just do it. Just do it. And yeah, there's still, you can go back through your color library, and you're going to find images that will make some great conversions to black and white. And I've done that, based on my old catalog. So RAW versus JPEG, you always want to shoot in RAW. Absolutely. Because even, color or black and white, because that's where you're going to get all your flexibility in post-processing. Posing for black and white. Since color can't carry the image anymore, your composition and tone range is even more important. And without the color attention, your attention is directed to light and shadow and shapes and forms. And one of the things about shooting 4x5 is that I know some of you out there probably have in the past or familiar, the 4x5, when you look at the ground glass in the back, it's upside down and inverted. That'll slow you down. It's kind of disconcerting initially, but you get used to it, and it helps slow you down and forces you to start focusing on shapes and forms and that type of thing. So I look for compositions that are clean and simple. Too much detail that might work fine in a color composition just ends up being too much clutter in a black and white, and it just doesn't work well. So that's why you really need to kind of learn to simplify your images. And looking for strong graphic structure, and that's kind of related to the other texture, lines, forms, shapes, those kinds of things. Best shooting times? Anytime. That's a blessing about black and white. And color, we talk about the golden hour and the blue hour and all such as that. You can get great images, great photography in black and white any time of the day. So, like I said, you're no longer bound by the blue hours and golden hours. And lens focal length, I love wide angle. This particular image you see here is Lone Pine Peak through Lathe Arch in Alabama Hills. Now, to get this image, I had my Sony A7R IV at the time, and I had to get down in this crevice with a 16 millimeter lens, and all contorted, and my limbs aching. My tripod was at different angles that I never thought it could do. The only way I could get this shot. Now, I couldn't do it today with my medium format. It wouldn't be possible. But still, wide angle is, in landscape photography, is still good. However, saying that, medium to long telephoto is a good lens for black and white because it helps you getting back to making your composition simple, intimate landscapes, isolating certain elements in a potential composition. I think that's a great lens. But most of my images in black and white are taken with a 24-105, and that 24-105, and this is back when I was shooting Sony, but even now shooting the medium format, the focal lengths that I use are somewhat equivalent with the exception of 100-400. But essentially that medium, normal to, slightly wide to normal to medium long focal lengths. But the 100-400, when I was shooting it was very useful. I use that quite a bit in my black and white photography. Okay, so if you give me just a second, what I want to do is set up a quick demo of, depending on the timing, at least one, maybe two if there's enough time. Fairly simple images, but it'll give you an idea of how I approach my processing. So give me just a moment.
You got it. After his talk, we'll we'll give you 5-10 minutes to just kind of reorganize while we set up for the competition. All right? We're going to show all the ones that Craig judged, and then the second slideshow will be the winners in each classroom and class group.
Okay, can you still see? Can you see my Lightroom?
Not yet. We see processing demo copy.
Okay. All right, hang on.
Okay, now we've got a Lightroom screen with 3 images.
Okay, all right, good. Now, these are 3 images. I'll just start with this one here. We'll go into the develop module. This was a recent image I took just at Hocking Hills this May at a workshop, doing a workshop. This is Cedar Falls, called Cedar Falls. Now, typically what I'll do, this is, now this, obviously this is not film. So this will be applicable to most of what you all do, you know, in terms of, I know, I assume that most of you are digital photographers. So this is how I would approach this. I would go into, way I start out, of course, if you need to do lens corrections, there's not going to be any lens corrections for me to do here. Well, you can remove chromatic aberrations and enable profile corrections. Well, this actually did do that. I wasn't sure it was going to based on the camera I was using, the lens, but I'll do that first. And then I'll go into black and white, convert it to black and white. And what I might do is I might go down to your black and white sliders here. I don't do this very often or to a great deal. But here I might say if I, and this kind of relates to what I was saying earlier about your filters in film. Well, if I increase the colors of green, if I put a green filter on my film camera, it's going to lighten the colors of green. So when I do that digitally is I just go in green slider here and I move it up and those green trees get lighter. So you can do that to anything in there, this green gets lighter. So you can use that to a degree. I'll use the blue slider sometime with skies, but for the most part, I don't use these a lot because I do most of my adjustments in just in other dodging burning techniques. So, and one of the first things I'll do back in the basic sliders, I will probably adjust my exposure down a little bit depending on the image. I won't do a lot to begin with. I might come up whites a little bit. Just do a little bit here. I don't, maybe I push clarity up just slightly. But now what I'll do is, so I just do, sometimes I won't do anything in here first, but I might just do a couple things, but only in a minor sense. But then I'll go up to my masking and Lightroom. You know, I think you mentioned earlier that you've got a Lightroom guru there in your midst. And boy, I tell you, Lightroom has come a long, long way. And their masking tools and everything are just, to me, out of the, I used to do maybe 30% of my work in Lightroom and then the rest of it in Photoshop. Now I think it's the other way around. As a matter of fact, it's maybe even more so in Lightroom. But anyway, okay, so initially I'll go here and I'm going to pick, typically I'll pick a radial mask here to start with, and then I'll invert it. And so this, I might feather it, maybe I'll bring down the feather a little bit to about 40 or somewhere around there. And this isn't so much, so it's kind of like creating a vignette, but really the purpose is not so much to create a vignette, is it is just to bring certain values down along the edges to give me a, because I'll brighten some of this stuff back up. But it's just kind of a starting point. So I'll come back in here now and I might say, well, I'm going to go and do a, what I want to do to this image. I want to bring up the, I'm going to create another mask. This time I'm going to do a linear gradient. And I'm going to bring it up, say, about like so. Whoops. And I just want to bring up the shadows here so I can get a little more detail down below that little bluff there. I might bring up the clarity just a little bit. All right, now what I want to do, so I'm gonna create another mask. So what am I doing here? I'm just burning and dodging is all I'm doing. I'm just using Lightroom tools to do it. Now I'm gonna add a brush. And I am going to, let's see, we're going to increase, lower the flow, density is fine, feather maybe up a little bit. And I'm going to lower the exposure. I want to lower the exposure of all of this here. And I'll probably do that even more. Now, I do like some of what I am seeing. I'm going to do another brush here. I do like what I'm seeing here in some of this area coming out from where the fall hits the water in the pool. And I don't want to lighten it, but necessarily, or I do want to lighten it, but I don't want to increase the exposure of it. I think I'm going to try to increase the whites and see what happens to it a little bit. Not much. If I was increasing the exposure, it would increase everything, but I'm just increasing the whites. There like that. And I can increase highlights just a little and brings that up. And maybe even the clarity. Remember I said something about clarity. You can increase clarity a lot of ways that you could not do it with color. Now, what I want to really do is emphasize this falls. I'm not so much interested in all this stuff over here. It's important, but it's only important in providing some context to the falls. So I think what I want to do right now is do another radial. And I think I'm going to put it over the falls. Invert it again. Now I'm going to bring down the exposure again. Now, what it did, of course, is it affected some of my area in the little white area of the falls. So what I'm going to do now is subtract with a brush and just subtract some of these areas from that. So they're not included. Okay. Now, this side of the falls is a little bright for me. This side is needs a little boost, I think. So what I want to do is I think I'm gonna maybe use another brush. And this time I'll just, before I add anything, I'll just show this with the mask, kind of the area that I want to deal with. And I think I want to bring down the whites slightly, or maybe the blacks, bring down the blacks. Okay. Exposure just slightly. Maybe add a little bit more there. Okay. Now I think I want to do something similar to the other side. Again, using a brush, but this time I need to increase the exposure a little bit, increase the whites. And I'm not doing anything specifically by number. I'm just doing it by, hey, because I can adjust it later. I know the areas I want to adjust and I can go back and fine tune it after I get the initial piece in there. So this is just bringing out a little bit more texture to the right-hand side of the composition. Might want to bring up a little texture, maybe a little more clarity, see what happens. Don't want to do too much. I don't want this to get too bright. I might have to go back in and adjust that a little bit. Okay, let me go into another brush. Did I create the brush? Okay, brush. And whites down. There, just a little bit better. Okay, now I want to do one more brush, and because some of the stuff we've done here, I want to bring up these shadows, bring up the shadows in this brush, and back in here again, bring this back up because we lost a little bit of that whenever we did a couple of other adjustments. So shadows up, whites up, maybe the exposure slightly. All right, now I'm doing this kind of quickly here because I know I don't want to run up on time.
You've got 10 minutes.
Okay, I want to increase the whites. Huh? How we doing on time?
Yeah, you've got 10 minutes before we have to start our competition. Can you hear that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, 10 minutes. Yeah, I think so. All right, I'm gonna leave this. What I would do is I can do some more to highlight these falls, get some more white and definition in these strands here. But typically whenever I'm done here, I will take this into edit in. Silver effects, okay. Now I'm going directly into Nick's Silver Effects here to do a final touch up. Typically what I'll do is take it into Photoshop and go into Nick from there. But some people don't use Photoshop or just don't care to or whatever. This is another option. You can go straight. Oh, yeah. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll typically do, well, it's kind of still booting up here. Okay, this dynamic brightness, sometimes I'll play with it. There's no magic number here. It's just playing with it. Soft contrast, I can play with slightly. Fine structure, I will always do something in. And they're usually just minor tweaks. Then I'll come down. I like to protect my highlights. So a lot of times I'll just go those all the way up. And I'll come down to toning. I like selenium toning. All my black and whites are selenium tone. That's just a personal preference. That's all. That dates back to whenever I was doing darkroom stuff. And then vignette. Sometimes I'll do like a lens fall off. But in this one, well, I can do the lens fall off, but then I'll back down on the amount by about a half. Let's say apply that. Now, when I apply that, it takes it back into Lightroom, and that's your finished product. But let me go back to before I went into there and see if I can do something here real quick. Okay, so that was the original image, and this is where we ended up before we went into Silver Effects. So that's just a backslash. You can kind of compare the difference. Okay, so we've only got a few more minutes, so I think I'll just leave it there. I don't have time to do the others, but I would think I'll open it up for questions. Oh, wait just 1 second here. 1 second here. Lightroom.
Oh.
Okay, this is just playing through a couple of images that were converted or processed black and white from earlier on to show you how they change.
We're not, we're seeing you in our logo.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a
well,
photo.
never mind then.
We're showing a photo of you.
I
and-
think, all right, well, never mind. It was just a few images that showed before and after conversion. But anyway, since we only got a couple of minutes, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. A round of applause for Craig first. We're going to do all the black and white now. Okay. Are there any questions in the audience? Paul?
Using your waterfall example, I'm somewhat surprised you didn't use the luminosity range to pick up just the waterfall and brighten it up a bit.
Did you hear that, Craig?
Could you,
All right.
I'm not well enough. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, his question had to do with, why didn't you use the luminosity range when you were lightening the water in the waterfalls?
You could have done that. You could have done, there are a number of different ways you could do that. You could use the luminosity range to do it. And some of my habits are reflect back to before they added that feature in there, or you could do the luminosity range. The way they do it now, there's a number of different ways you could do it. As a matter of fact, you could even do it, I think, with the object. There's a number of things that you can do. I think that's to me, one of the best advantages to the masking is that object identification. But yeah, there are different ways that you can do it.
Other questions? Anybody?
Any other questions for Greg?
A question.
Yes.
I'll see if I get this out correctly. In your film negatives, once you've got the image on your negative, do you print your negative with contrast filters, or do you scan the negative and then do your adjustment in Photoshop?
I scan my so the negatives are, I don't use color filters. I mean, I use color filters on my film, yes. But then when I develop my negatives myself, and then I scan them on an Epson 850 scanner, and then bring them into Lightroom and Photoshop to do the processing.
Anybody else? One more question.
Okay, since nobody else is asking the question, in the early 80s, when you were going TDY and you had a couple pilots throwing golf clubs into their airplane and you threw your camera gear into the airplane, what was the airplane?
An F-16. No, I'm kidding. C-130. C-130 mostly.
Okay,
Okay,
any other on-topic questions?
Julie, you want to say anything to Greg?
Thank you.
He'll be on the phone later. Craig, thank you so much for joining us. It was a good place.
Okay, enjoyed it, guys. Have
Really
fun.
opened our
Keep
eyes
shooting.
to,
Try that black and white
what
stuff.
What you really have to do to get a good image, and what kind of effort it takes, and your dedication to make those beautiful images is really something to be proud of. We will publish your website, the Craig McCord Photography.com, and people can view the images there as well. And we want to make sure that that's good. And I want to thank you for also judging our show. And so you can take the rest of the night out.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.